I'm in a garden this week for this episode. I'm hoping that everything is plugged in and hopefully we get some good little animals popping in. And we've got a nice kava plant behind us today. And we've got many mosquitoes biting at my legs. So welcome to this week's Eco Show. This is number 16. And I'm Henry. This is Eco Show. I hope you enjoy. Our animal of the week this week. We're going back in time. Hop in the time machine with me. We're going back to 66 to 68 million years ago to the age of the dinosaurs. And we're just going for a nice basic dinosaur this week. We're looking at the T-Rex. So we've gone back in time to the time of the dinosaurs. And we're checking out the T-Rex. Tyrannosaurus rex means tyrant lizard. Or Tyrannosaurus means tyrant lizard. And it lived mostly in what is now Western North America. We'll put up a photo of that. And the main herbivore that it would have been around and probably eating was a triceratops. Nice little three-horn guy. And also some duck-billed little creatures out there. So it went extinct around 66 million years ago, which was the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event. And that happened 66 million years ago. That's when all non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. And 3/4 of all plant and animal life went extinct. Sea turtles and crocodilians, they survived. So those sea turtles and crocodiles we see today are some direct descendants. And they know that this event happened around that time because they looked at the geological history. When they looked down through the soils and through geology to that period of time, they can see that this extinction event lined up with high levels of iridium in the soils, which is associated with asteroids more so than the Earth's crust. So the evidence now is suggesting that it's more likely that asteroids caused this extinction than a big volcanic eruption. I can see like 10 mosquitoes on me at the moment. It's gonna be I'm paying in blood for this episode. And so the impact from this event left a 180 kilometer crater off the Gulf of Mexico, and thought the asteroid would have been 10 to 15 kilometers wide, which would be maybe around 5 to 7 miles wide, so pretty large. And so back to our time machine, looking at this Tyrannosaurus rex back in time. It had this huge skull that you're probably familiar with. It's big skull, and it was balanced by this long tail. So it's kind of like how a kangaroo has a long tail to balance it. It would have had really big legs and these small little arms, which were very strong. And there's a bit of debate about these arms, because the T-Rex is always made fun of for its small arms. And there's a lot of debate about what those arms would have been used for. Some people think they'd be associated with mating, like grabbing on, but both males and females would have had them. People also think they could have been used for slashing prey at close distance. Some think they were of no use and were just sort of becoming vestigial, which just means like our appendix, how it doesn't really have any modern use. Some people think they used it to get off the ground. And some other interesting ideas are that T-Rexes are thought to possibly have been social. And so when they were hanging out, having some cigars, not really doing that, but when they would be group feeding, all eating on something that, if you have big arms and you're doing group feeding, you want to keep the arms out of the way. So maybe having small arms would have kept you safe from getting your arm bitten by somebody. Some other thoughts are that there's some evidence that T-Rex may have had feathers, so they could have been used to groom themselves. They could have used these small arms, possibly, but they are pretty short arms. And like we mentioned, in order to have this big head, they had this large tail, so it's like the bigger you want your head to be, you have to balance it with the tail. And so if you have smaller arms, then you'd be able to have a bigger head, which may have been beneficial. And the last sort of idea is that we may not know because the context may be lost in geological history. So there you go. Many possible uses for those little arms. And looking up, these creatures could be over 12 meters or 40 feet tall. So that's going to be as big as a house or something like that. And it was found originally in the 1910s, but research slowed for long periods of time because of the Great Depression until the 1950s. And the most complete or substantial fossil was found by someone named Sue Hendrickson, who was an amateur paleontologist. On paper it says amateur, but when you look up her credentials, she was pretty legit doing her thing. And this big fossil that she found was named after her, Sue. Some more information about their anatomy. They had big old teeth, and they were like, people call them lethal bananas. So they weren't particularly sharp, but they were big and they had a serrated bit on the edge. So they would be good for bone crushing, and so they could swallow whole parts of an animal. So if you've got these big teeth, you can crush through the bone and then just rip off a chunk and swallow it. They were pretty efficient at moving. They're thought to have good smell, like that of vultures. So there's some ideas that although they could be predatory, they may have acted a bit like vultures. They also had good hearing, and because of where their eyes were, they could see forward, and they had good depth perception for hunting. So it definitely would not have been a fun time if you're getting hunted by one of these guys, especially if they're social. That takes it to another level of creepy. So that's our animal of the week. We're all good with that. And now we're moving to our research for this week. So we have got another article about compound effects of things. Last week we talked about how the compound interaction of droughts and heat waves together can lead to some pretty pretty rough events. And this week, we're talking about the intersection of extreme weather and infectious disease. This is by John Drake et al. All of the references for these articles will be in the description of the YouTube video because it looks funky when I put it in the podcast. And I've tried searching for this, but it's pretty hard to find this channel. So the easiest way, if you're trying to find the YouTube and you're listening to it on the podcast, the easiest way is probably to go to the Instagram, and then I've got the links there. I'll put the link to where to find these in the description for this. Yeah, I'll just put the link to the podcast website, and then you got links to everywhere else that are on there. Okay, so this article talking about extreme weather and infectious disease. And with climate change, we've got a plane coming overhead. This is my first outdoor recording for this, so I'm hoping it picks up bird sounds. It's a little breezy, so I hope it doesn't pick up too much wind. I've got this little thing on the mic, so hopefully it's not disturbing, but we've got a bunch of lovely birds out in a nearby fig tree. So hopefully they are making a sonic appearance. Man, I'm going to be itching. Okay. So, extreme weather events. They're increasing, and we're having issues with diseases. And when you've got extreme weather events, you sort of increase the likelihood of a bad disease event occurring as well. So this article is sort of an environmental justice article, because oftentimes when you find these multiple factors interrelating, people who are most vulnerable to these are oftentimes people that are the most vulnerable to any sort of issues coming. And so compound disturbances, which is just when you have two or more disturbances coming together and creating an impact, are like big weather events, stopping people from getting medical care, or leading to people being housed in unsanitary conditions. So you can have a big weather event, a big weather disturbance, and that closes roads and prevents people from getting treatment that they may need. And also in the aftermath of this event, you can have big situations where a lot of people are needing to be housed together. I'll put a photo of the Astrodome after Hurricane Katrina. That was a whole bunch of people that you're putting together, and then you're exposing them all to lots of disease when you got people close together. And they talk about in this article 3 main components. And if there's an image in this article, I'll put it up now, of environmental disturbance that you have to account for. And this article is really calling for people to bring these more into account and think about them more when you're looking at what communities are at big risk for issues. So the first thing you're looking at for a community is exposure. And so the frequency and magnitude of distribution on different communities is what exposure is talking about. How exposed is this community to some big issues? So in this article, they talk about the area of the southwestern United States because they're at big risk of hurricanes and tornadoes. The second factor is sensitivity. And so the characteristics or conditions that make people more likely to be impacted by that exposure. So when people are hit by a weather event, are there few roads allowing them to leave that space? Are there not many healthcare facilities? And then adaptive capacity, which is talking about how well are the institutions around that space set up to serve that community when it is impacted. And this is a three-pronged approach that you can map once you have a scale for each one of these factors, and you can identify areas that are at high risk and make sure that you are giving them the service that they need, or at least doing your best to buffer them against issues coming. And so this may seem like sort of doom and gloom to think about this, but the better you can map out the way that people are at potential risk, then the better you can prepare for that. And this includes long-term care, and when you're looking at the institutions, those institutions have to be able to support people through long-term issues that may have come from a problem like this. And their big call to action is for a new science of colliding disasters. I didn't write down what journal this is from. Unfortunate. And I cut us down to one research article this week. It's going to be a shorter episode. Just in general, I think I'm going to make them a little bit shorter. And so we're not all glugged down with too many research articles, and then I can talk about them more or in more depth. Okay. So that's all of our research for this week, actually. So we're done with research now, and on to news. And the first news is actually, I found on a news site, but it was a summary of some research that was happening. And it's saying that coastal marshes are keeping up with sea level rise, which is some good news. So coastal marshes are like wetlands or areas of intermediate vegetation and soil between the sea and the land. And these areas are important because they store a lot of carbon in the soil. So plant material in these marshes will die and then sink down, and then the conditions of marshes are such that that plant material isn't broken down, and so that carbon is stored instead of being broken down and used by bacteria. And that's an important carbon store around the world, and people are nervous about coastal marshes with rising sea levels, because as sea levels rise, marshes may not be able to keep up. But this research was finding that marshes do appear to be keeping up with that impact. And let's see, what else have we got about that? So I'm getting to like a critical level where I was getting bitten by mosquitoes, but then you're not itchy immediately now. But now the itchiness is starting to come. So now my mind is going there. So I'm getting a little bit loose-headed. No, I'm not getting lightheaded, but it's like I'm thinking about the itchiness now. So that's happening. Okay, yeah. So if sea levels rise too quickly, you lose balance in coastal marshes, which are important for carbon sequestration. And the buildup and continued growth of marshes is dependent on continuous deposit of sediment, so dirt and things like that, as well as organic matter, like we said before, escaping decomposition. So soil accretion has sped up in all the marshes that this research was looking at. And I think there was 9 places looked at overall. So let's see. Yeah, I think it was 6. Soil accretion sped up in the marshes, and so they were able to grow with rising sea level. But 3 could not keep up, and that was due to dams. So you need this sort of balance where you need your marshes to be accruing enough sediment to be able to keep up with sea level rise, and there were 3 that weren't able to keep up because dams prevent sediment from moving downstream. This is on the east coast of the United States. And the solution that they talk about is that living shorelines should be developed. So pretty much importing mud into some of these places where the sediment can't keep up. And these are really important spaces because they hold on to carbon, and they are sort of buffers for when you have extreme events like hurricanes and things along those lines. So it's important to keep these around, and they're also really important for biodiversity. So on multiple levels, these are important. Have a look in your community. If you're in a coastal area, it's probably pretty likely that most of the wetlands around the world have been drained for agriculture or for development. But there's a growing movement to bring wetlands back. So have a look around. Wetlands, marshes. People tend to like those because they bring charismatic birds around. So have a look, see if you can get involved. Okay, our next news article is that there is an ocean cleanup milestone, oceancleanup.org, and this is not sponsored by them, is the only organization working on clearing garbage out of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So that's that big patch of garbage in the Pacific that has a huge amount of trash in it, and they've collected so far 200,000 kilograms of plastic. This is a Dutch non-profit, and they use 1.5 mile length booms with nets to capture trash. In a video that I saw of it pouring it out, is just whole big crates and things like that. And this startup thinks they can clean the whole thing in a decade. And what was interesting to me was thinking about how much microplastics there are. I wonder what the balance of plastic materials are between what you can catch in a net versus what's really tiny now. But some pretty cool news from there. And the funny thing to me is apparently they collect it and then they recycle it, but and they make I think they make some sunglasses. But I was thinking, I was like, these sunglasses don't look great. Like, to be honest, the sunglasses kind of look like something you'd find in the garbage patch. So it's like, could we maybe try and use this for something that I don't know, is not going to be just thrown away again. We've got lots of airplane things. That might be a helicopter. Again, I don't know how this is going to, sound-wise, how this is going to come through. I can hear a bit of white noise sound, so I may have had this thing like too receptive. So if the sound quality is not great this week, I apologize. Hopefully it's not too bad to listen to. I'd like to start doing these outside now, but I will have to start wearing pants because this mosquito situation is out of control. The interesting thing I found is that it's usually about the first 10 minutes or so of being in a mosquito area that I'm just getting bitten up, and then they leave. So I wonder if all the mosquitoes around have gotten filled up, or if something in your body changes that makes it less appealing for them to take your blood. Yeah, so that's our good news about ocean cleanup. Some more good news. Rooms with plants could protect you from cold and flu by disinfecting the air. So I'm in some super disinfected air right now, and this could protect you. So this Australian study found that they may be able to remove cold and flu viruses from the air because as plants are doing their thing, they produce hydrogen peroxide, which is that stuff that you used to get put on your wound and it would bubble up and stuff like that. They've since stopped doing that. I think it's not particularly great for your wounds, but it is a disinfectant. And so they found that hydrogen peroxide emerges from the leaves of houseplants and could sanitize the air. The ones that I already know, I'm going to make this the clickbait title of this podcast episode. So the plants that produce the most of this apparently are African violets and devil's ivy. So supposedly if you want to potentially sanitize the air in your place, try growing those plants. Some more good news. I think I'm going to keep on. I like this with I'm not really sure how long I've been going for now. I think we're still a little bit under half an hour. Then I'm going to make it a little bit more. I'll do one research article a week. And we can go a little bit more in depth, talk about some complex things, and then just do some nice news that's a little bit more easy to digest. Okay, so Utah is getting 130% more snowpack than normal. This is from recent rains and things that have been going on in the western United States. And they get 95% of their water from snowpack. And the Great Salt Lake has risen by 3 feet. So we'll put a photo of the Great Salt Lake up. That's kind of a tongue twister. Great Salt Lake, Great Salt Lake, Great Salt. No, maybe it's not that much of a tongue twister. Anyways, a while back, in an earlier episode, I talked about the Great Salt Lake and how it is shrinking, and people are concerned about that because as the Great Salt Lake shrinks, sediments are exposed and those get picked up by the air and create really bad air quality. And this is an important area for many species of birds and rare insect species. And there are sea monkeys there as well, brine shrimp. So this is good news for the Great Salt Lake. But I hope that we can see some sort of institutional changes with how they're managing this lake, because partially you've had a bad drought in the western United States over the past few years, and that's been causing this issue, but also more and more water has been diverted in Utah towards the city because you want to grow the city. That makes sense. But if you want to be sustainable, you gotta keep things under control. So this is great news for the western United States that a lot of the water levels are up, but I hope that there are some more changes come down the line, because it's no guarantee that this will happen for a while. But it has been good this year. Okay, and our last piece of news is that there were Amur leopard. So Amur, that is AMUR, leopards are very rare. And there were 2 twins born at the San Diego Zoo in California. So 2 cubs were born, and this is a big success for the rare cat. It's thought that there are less than 200 of these leopards left. They're native to Siberia, and they have been increasing in number since 2007. So this is a model that would be great to see more zoos move towards, and that's sort of how zoos are justifying their existence now, is that they are genetic banks. So places for species to grow them and raise them up and allow them to come back into the wild. So that's all our news this week. We got through our animal, and we got through our research. It's a little bit quicker. And yeah, that's it. If this was too short, go back and watch one of the old ones. Or let me know. Probably easiest to let me know through Instagram at the moment. The link will be there. If you have any comments or feedback, I would appreciate it very much. And that's about it for today. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.